Hello, hello. How's everybody doing today? Thank you guys very much for stopping by. We have our second Bhagavad Gita lecture slash discussion stream that's beginning now with Craig Williams, who has just about finished selling out his Tantric Physics 1 and 2 book on Anathema Publishing. I was just congratulating him for that. So if you guys don't have a copy of that yet, I would recommend you get on top of that quickly because we will be waiting for the soft cover here in the very near future. I'm sure people are going to be buying those up with their Christmas money. so so yeah, today we're, as I said, similar to our last stream. He has chosen three lines from the Bhagavad Gita that he's going to be discussing with us. So I will just sort of hang out here with you guys and watch this thing happen. Donbot, the book is Tantric Physics 1 and 2 from Anathema Publishing. I will drop a link to it in chat while he's speaking here, and you can check it out after the stream. Don't check it out while he's talking. You can do whatever you want to, but I recommend you waiting. So I will go ahead and pull him in here now.
Thank you so much. So I thought we'd cover some key verses from the Gita today from chapter 6, which is a very unique chapter focused specifically on depending on the translation, we could say the yoga of meditation or jhana yoga, which is a very important concept about how our mind works and how deeper states of consciousness can influence our everyday life, which is a very important thing. And verse 6 to me has always been a super important one that I think most people can really understand. And that is, we can just read it quickly and we can discuss it a bit. It says, "For one who has subdued the mind is a friend. However, for one who has not controlled the mind is the greatest enemy." And so that is a really important concept, obviously, in any kind of things that we encounter in life is our actual psychological interpretation of what is happening to us technically becomes our reality. And that's something that's important for us to understand is oftentimes something happens to us or we encounter something, and the only thing that we truly encounter is our perception of the event or our perception of this kind of a film that we see called reality. And so oftentimes in the world we have now where we have this constant obsession of science, right? Everyone always wants to say science, science, science. This idea that we can exist in some objective reality, but truly we know everything we experience is some type of subjective reality. But this is one of the most important reasons why someone would approach the science of yoga and want to understand the techniques of yoga. Oftentimes people think of yoga, and I can say quickly, when I'm speaking of yoga, I'm not talking about physical exercise. I'm not talking about doing asana practice. What I'm talking about is meditation proper. The idea of learning to calm the mind, learning to focus the mind, and then learning to take the mind into deeper meditative states. And so by doing that, it's not always just to attain some magical yogic city or to have some great occult experience. All those things can happen. From the perspective of the Bhagavad Gita, the most important thing is if we don't control our mind, then our mind controls us. And that's a really, really important thing to consider. And this even has implications from Ayurvedic medicine. That's a big thing in Ayurveda. The concept of what we eat affects how our mind is. What we see on a daily basis affects how our mind reacts. And how we breathe affects how our mind reacts to the world. So that's one of the most important things about learning to breathe correctly, learning to calm the mind, is that we could almost compare the mind to water. So water's the mind, they calm. So we can see a clear reflection of what's truly happening. If not, then we're constantly battling our mind all the time. In many ways, Buddhism historically has done a better job of bringing this message across. from what I've seen historically. Although if you're a practicing yoga practitioner, if you're a Hindu or a Vedic practitioner, however way you want to use the terminology, everyone knows this. It's just they don't teach it that per se. Buddhism has always said, okay, our perspective of reality is going to be so important because it's just our own perspective, and we need to understand that. So this verse obviously has great implications. But for me, the most important thing for people to take home from this verse is that the techniques of yoga have very important implications on how we view the world. And this is also, too, we could bring up quickly many of the important teachings of Ramana Maharshi. We used to always say, the individual's salvation was more important than the world's salvation. And what he meant by that was if someone worked for their own self-realization, if someone worked for their own calm state of mind, then that's going to reflect out into the world. Instead of always seeking to change someone, the best thing to do is to change yourself first. And then you have the power, the balance, the calmness to radiate that out into the world. And also, too, this is one of the reasons why people who are kind of looking to yoga to learn to calm the mind should follow the process of learning pranayama or learning how to breathe correctly. We could touch on that. Then also really kind of contemplating the concepts of pratyahara, which means turning the senses off. And then also learning dharana, which means concentration. So oftentimes people jump straight into meditation and they don't learn how to breathe correctly. They don't learn the concept of turning off their senses before they do it. And then they don't, for sure, we can talk about that a bit in today's world, they don't know how to concentrate. And so we can see that constantly with people always saying they have ADD, ADHD. I see that clinically as a medical practitioner constantly. And so that's a big concept, right? So, unless you can concentrate the mind, you're not really able to even approach the true aspect of meditation. And so that's one of the reasons. So all these limbs of yoga, the concept of pratyahara, which is a big one, which precedes these inner practices of yoga, is a very common one now because it's about turning the senses off. And we see that a lot now with, many people are talking about this with our technology, right? They'll say at nighttime, turn off your computer screens or don't be exposed to certain stimulation. So that's a very basic concept in yoga of pratyahara is we need to turn our senses off. And what we mean by that is we need to turn off the exteriorization of our senses. And so that typically means that that's our first common idea is that someone is closing their eyes, they're sitting in a silent room. They're not saying anything. So that is an aspect of pratyahara. But what I always like to emphasize is the most fundamental way to begin pratyahara is just to stop the influx of artificial imagery. And so that would be artificial light, harsh artificial sound, and where we have noise pollution living in a city. They try to get away from that. And then, of course, turning off, any kind of screens or light, which might be taking your attention away, and just expose yourself as much as you can to natural light, natural sound, natural smells. And these are all common concepts within yoga. That's why someone burns meditation or lights a candle or tries to sit in a quiet room to meditate. All these things have. And I thought it would be an interesting one to touch on that because we talk about ambient music a lot, how ambient music can influence one's consciousness, right? So ambient music, maybe to some, they would think it was noise pollution, but most people understand ambient music. Its point is to help you just kind of reach a deeper state of perception. People can feel that. And so I don't think there's a problem with using music to prepare for meditation if it's a type of music that helps the nervous system. And that's what I think. And that's very individual for different people, but I've always been a fan of using ambient music to prepare the mind space to calm down. And oftentimes I'll listen to ambient music to get my mind just kind of calm down before I'll sit to meditate. So that's it's not that you need to cut all the senses off. It's just trying to cut off senses that are irritating or harsh. And we see that constantly. I mean, most people are exposed to artificial sound and light. They're just bombarded with it daily. So that really affects our nervous system. So that's kind of a concept of that. And then when you learn to do that, and then you start to learn to concentrate. And so that's a big thing to do before someone learns to meditate. They need to learn concentration technique. That's why people have a mantra. They focus on the mantra as part of the meditation, or they focus on the yantra, the geometric symbol, or something as simple as tradaka, or candle gazing. It's a very common yogic technique, was just to focus on the candle alone. That was to start help the person develop concentration. As simple as that. And then once they were able to do all that, they could have meditation proper or enter in that. So the whole idea is all these techniques are working together to calm the background noise of our mind. And I think that's what I typically try to convey to people, is that all of our minds have a certain background. There's a certain resonance. And what we think the most, whatever we're saying to ourselves in our internal dialogue the most, that starts to take on life of its own and influences our mind. So that's what we want to start to develop over time, is to at least to see what we're creating in our mind space, see what in the world is contributing to that, and then starting to work to where we can at least recognize it and then start to back away from it. Sometimes for some people, that's only at certain periods of the day, right? They live a very active life in the world. So they can only, meditate or calm their minds, let's say in the morning or at night. That's fine. The whole idea is just to have periods where the mind has a break from that. So the mind has a break. And it's very similar to fasting. People can think of that when they eat. It's like the reason why we fast is to give our digestive system a break instead of constantly just bombarding it with information. And we also know that when we fast, it affects our consciousness. It affects our state of mind. So that's kind of an aspect of that. So if people start to become aware of that, then they can spend small periods of time in quiet, calming the mind, and over time they'll start to see how that affects their everyday reality, and they're less likely to have road rage, and less likely to be so quickly angry at someone. Or for me, what I hope is that people are less paranoid and worrisome and less fearful about what's going on in their everyday life. Just those that's like parasites that are constantly draining people. They don't even realize that. And so that's something this verse is trying to say, is like all the techniques of yoga are helping to make your mind your friend. Because if you don't understand what's going on in your mind, then it becomes your enemy. So, and of course, this has, implications for psychotherapy and counseling, coaching, health coaching, and all those things too, which you could easily take that into any of those realms. So this is a great example of, a verse from the Gita that can be applied to so many ways of therapy, which to me is very beautiful. A psychotherapist might read this and understand something different than a health coach, than a counselor, than a meditation teacher or yoga teacher. And that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that, because we have to remember the whole environment of the Bhagavad Gita is a hard reality of Arjuna sitting there about to have to go into battle. He's not sitting in a cave. Arjuna's not sitting in a quiet ashram waiting for his teacher to give him his next mantra. So we always have to remind ourselves when we read verses from the Gita that, okay, this is happening. This is being said in an environment which is very much like our everyday life, which is why I love to talk about these verses. Even though obviously this verse has esoteric implications too, of course, yes. But to ignore the everyday reality to me is a shame.
Yeah. Let me just hop in here real quick. I didn't mention at the beginning. You guys should all go ahead and drop any questions that you have, anything that comes to you while he's talking. Just go ahead and type it in, drop it into chat, and he's going to continue he's going to keep talking here for a little bit longer, and then we'll get to all of my questions and you guys' questions at the end. So go ahead and ask the questions as you have them, but we won't actually be asking him those questions until he's done with this section, just so everybody knows that you don't think I'm ignoring you. Anyways, all right, go ahead. Thanks.
That's important information.
Yeah.
So the next verse leads us into the same concept, and it continues on. It says, "Those who have subdued the mind and are calm attain realizations of Para-Atma. We can discuss what that means. For such people, heat and cold, happiness and distress, honor and dishonor are the same. And this is a very powerful person. What they're saying here is they're not talking about a robotic life. This is the key thing here. They're not saying that nothing matters, nothing is important, nothing's affected. It's almost as someone is in kind of some state of sleep. This is not what they're talking at all. What they mean is someone who is able to calm the mind and enter into a glimpse of the inner reality of the flame that exists within all of us. That person is not overreactive. Basically, it means the person is not hypersensitive. And this is a really good concept that often, when I teach this verse, I often bring in examples from medicine. And because I think people can grasp that and it brings it down to earth. And so they say for such persons, hot or cold are the same. Happiness and sadness are the same. Honor and dishonor are the same. What they mean is someone is just not being hypersensitive and they're not being hyperreactive. And this is like if somebody eats a food, if their body's allergic to it, it signals like a histamine cascade. The mast cells in our bodies will burst, histamine is released, and we get all these symptoms of stomach pain, itchy skin, red things, coughing, vomiting. It's talking about instant reactions we have. But if our digestive system is working well, we're less reactive to the foods we consume. That's a concept. So that's what they're saying. It's like you're still going to have to be exposed to the experiences, but you're not just going to be obsessed and grasping at a certain outcome. And I think this is very important because this is one of the things that we've seen people over the last, 3 to 4 years. We've had at least 15 years of the movement of mindfulness coming into kind of our parlance. They're using that word mindfulness, which typically means meditation in some sort. And then after a while, you started to see articles saying like, "Oh, is mindfulness dangerous? Is meditation dangerous?" And they'll have these examples of it. And I understand what they're saying, but they were also a little bit off the mark because what they initially were teaching was this kind of concept that meditations is going to make you happy all the time, or meditations is going to make you confident 24/7. If you just learn meditation, you'll never be afraid. That's not what it was at all. Meditation was examining our mind, and often we would encounter things which would make us afraid or learn more about ourselves. So it wasn't this kind of like quick get out of jail free card of being a human. As a human being, we still have to experience these emotions and engage with them, but we don't become obsessed with them. And that's the concept of what this verse is saying. This is a very important concept in higher levels of Kung Fu, right? They would teach that certain reactions that you were learning, you would just learn not to overreact, that you would just know something was going to happen, but you didn't freak out about it. You just were able to continue to stay focused. And, if something happened, you moved to the next choice. If something happened there, you moved to the next choice. It wasn't constantly freaking out if the exact things you wanted were not happening. And I think this is an important thing because a lot of people live in a mirage of what they expect to happen each day or what they think should happen. And I think that's a real dangerous way to be. I understand it because, of course, we all love to wake up and have very beautiful experiences all day. No one wants to wake up, I don't think, and have a negative experience or what they perceive as a negative experience. But unfortunately, life has its own development, and we have to engage with that. And so this is another concept it's saying is, that's very interesting to me because when they say this verse, it says, those who have subdued the mind, calm the waters of the mind. And then they go a step further. They say, and have attained realizations of para-atma or super consciousness. And for those people, then they give it examples of everyday life. They don't say, those people have visions of angels. Those people enter the dimension of something else. No, they don't talk about that. They're saying, no, they're just calmer. They're less overreactive. They're less judgmental. They're less, and that's what they're talking about here. So when we have those deeper inner experiences, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have some magical powers or something magical is going to happen, but it means our perception of the world should change. our reaction to the world should change. And once again, it doesn't mean that you don't care. It just means that you're not as affected by what happens. And that means you're calmer, so that when you're calmer, you can evaluate the situation in a better way instead of something happens. If something screams at you in the traffic, you're like, well, that person's probably having a bad morning. And then just let them go on their way and do their thing, as opposed to screaming back at them and racing after them or something. Or if someone dishonors you, no one likes to be dishonored, but we can't control what other people think and say. So we just have to say, well, that's what they think. But that shouldn't affect me, in my perspective. So I think that's one of the important concepts of this verse. Is I think we can also use this verse as a very important diagnostic tool for our spiritual practice. And what I mean by that is if someone is, let's just use this example since we're talking about meditation. If someone is meditating consistently, and even let's say they take it a step further and they started to have whatever they want to phrase it as, magical experiences, occult experiences, paranormal experiences, however you want to phrase it. But if they come back to their everyday life and then they're still just as angry and they're still just as sad and they're still just as paranoid and they're still just as impatient, something's not working. Something's not clicking over. And I wonder, even at that point, why are they doing what they're doing? But if we have a practice of study, whether it's prayer, lectio divina, meditation, and maybe for some people it is just yoga asana, that they're just doing that alone starts to make them calmer, then that's wonderful. That's it. Like, for example, I can definitely say for myself, in my life, running does that for me, right? Running makes me a much more relaxed, calmer person. But I don't go around saying running is my meditation. I don't say that. I just say that's different. That's a whole that's a whole other 2-hour lecture. But running is a very relaxing thing to me. But it relaxes me because it does something to my nervous system that calms us down. So then I can enter into meditation quicker. I'm less concerned about what happens every day. And so we can use our practice as a diagnostic tool. We can read this and go and see. Once again, it doesn't mean that your practice is, if it's working, that you should be happy all the time. No, that's not what it means. Or this means that you don't overreact, that you're able to look at what's happening and just where it's almost as if, once again, to use an example of Ramana Maharshi was always giving examples about film projection, because that was very new at the time. And so he would often talk about, our minds are like those images portrayed on the screen of the horse race. We look at it and we might get excited, but it's not real. It's just something we're watching. And if we pull that screen, all those images disappear. And so that's an idea, is that we should still be able to encounter life and encounter our thoughts and encounter our experiences with other humans, but we don't become so overreactive, or we don't live a life constantly expecting something to happen a certain way based on what we believe. So that's kind of I thought that's a very unique thing about that verse. So we can kind of use that to kind of help us at least see how our practice is going. And then if we have a teacher or a mentor or a tradition we can go to and judge that and see, okay, am I doing the right thing? Then you can move on from there. So that's kind of a unique part with that one. And then the next verse 8, it says, in my translation, it says, the yogi who is self-satisfied due to his or her knowledge and his or her realization, fixed in a spiritual nature, in control of the senses, sees dirt, stones, and gold equally. And that's an incredibly powerful verse for what we're talking about. And that we can kind of lump these last two verses together. So this is saying the yogi who has learned how to meditate, has had his spiritual experiences, learns to calm the senses. And I should say it quickly, it doesn't mean they've mastered all of this. Okay. It means you're starting to do it. You're getting comfortable with it. You're dedicating some time to practicing it. That means you're starting to have some unique experiences. Once again, this is like a diagnostic tool. They start to see dirt, stones, and gold equally. everything is equal. They're not looking at something with a judgment. They're not looking at something with a preconceived notion, which is very important in today's world. And this is what I often talk about when I often say, I hope people would see the world with less judgment and more compassion. And so that I often say that if we could view the world with less judgment and more compassion, then we would have a chance to have a more balanced dialogue. And that's kind of what this verse is talking about. This is why those things always influence me. So the next verse continues this. Such a yogi, such a person who's seeing the world this way, sees an honest well-wisher, an affectionate benefactor, an enemy, a neutral person, an envious person, a relative, the pious, and the impious with equal vision. They see everyone the same, which is a very important concept from Hinduism, from yoga, from Vedic ideas, is that everyone is equal on this level, the soul level. Everyone exists. Everyone has a spark of Sri Radha Krishna within. So we have to learn through our yogic practices to see that spark and to see people. But it doesn't mean, once again, remember where this is happening. This is happening on a battlefield. So Krishna didn't tell this to Arjuna and say, so as a result, don't fight. No, he said, no, you're here on the battlefield. You're still going to have to fight. But before you fight, let me tell you some things that you need to know. And so this doesn't mean that we don't defend ourselves against an enemy, right? If someone was attacking you, you still could defend yourself. It doesn't mean that you don't care what someone does for you. If someone wishes you well and you just say, oh, I don't even want to listen to you. That's not what this is saying. It's just saying don't let these life experiences push you to extremes in either way. For example, if someone was an honest well-wisher, they would say, sure, take the compliments, but don't let the compliments go to your head. Or if you had an enemy, if you have an enemy, you might want to say, okay, well, perhaps don't want to associate with that person. But then again, I don't want to sit around and obsess about that person. I don't want to necessarily wish that person ill will or want to harm that person. The best is just to let them go, just to get them out of our way. And so that's the idea with that as well, too. And then also to the pious and the impious with equal vision, that clearly is talking about just not judging people, just to not judge people about what you think they should be or how they should act based on something. And that's a very powerful verse because I think, unfortunately, we live in a world today where everyone's an armchair critic, everyone's judging everyone, everyone wants to criticize everyone. And I don't think that's really bringing us to any level of an improved dialogue with that. So I think these verses kind of show us about the importance of our mind state and how the balance of our mind, the environment of our mind, the background noise of our mind, all this affects how we engage with the world. So hopefully that we can take some questions on that, talk about that. And it has so many implications for it.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was really interesting. Yeah, it's really cool to read these verses ahead of time and kind of get an idea of what you're gonna talk about, and then it always goes quite a bit deeper than I could imagine myself, because I am much less versed in these things than you are. So it's really nice to have you here to do this. So to start off,
My honor.
Thank you
so
very
much
much for doing this again today. I hope we can keep doing these in the future, because it's really an interesting exercise. And as I said before the stream started, the fact that you can just naturally go into doing this and not have to sit there and basically write up a speech for us makes it just so much better. It's clearly coming from your heart, and it's obvious when listening to you.
Thank you so much.
So let's go ahead and take one question from chat here. Lucid Dreams said,
okay.
She was asking you to differentiate between pratyahara and sensory deprivation.
Oh, that's a great question. No, that's a really good question. I think an important thing to consider is that the pratyahara has different levels of what that could be, just like the concept of samadhi in yoga can have applications to different examples. So sensory deprivation would be a very radical form of pratyahara. That would be almost like equal to the Shambhavi mudra, when the individual closes their eyes, closes their ears, closes their mouth. They're sealing off all the senses. And that's even why, even in the Bhagavad Gita, it would say, if before someone meditates, find a quiet space, away from the extremes of weather. So they're just trying to say, hey, let's cut off all the exterior annoying things that can draw our senses out. So we know sensory deprivation things will really do that, right? It'll turn off light, turn off sound, turn off. So yeah, absolutely. You could, that would be, it's just that some people might not be ready for that or not even know how to do that. And so I think it depends on the individual. Different types of pratyahara practices can be more suited to different individuals. Some people, being in a dark room is very calming. Some people being in a dark room is frightening.
Yeah.
Even for me, I think I'm always fascinated at people's reaction to ambient music. And some people like, oh, it's so relaxing, so interesting. And other people are like, oh, it annoys me. It's weird. It's creepy. It's dark. And you can tell their senses are used to a certain thing. Just like a taste, right? Just like tasty. We taste something, you go, oh, that tastes hard. Other people, their palate's different. They're like, oh, that tastes delicious.
Yeah.
That's kind of the same thing with the pratyahara. I think that sensory deprivation can be wonderful, and that's definitely a benefit of that. So it's just there's different stages, different types of pratyaharas. But what a great question! But it can definitely be used for that experience for sure.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm noticing my camera's flashing here. If you're losing me, I'm not losing you, just so you know.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, perfect,
So
perfect, perfect.
I'll hop in and say something if so. I don't know. I don't know what's going on with my camera there. It's a piece of junk. That's why I bought a new one.
No,
And anyways,
no worries.
yeah, so well, all right. So I have two questions off of what you just said. One is just kind of a quick and funny question. It have you actually been into a sensory deprivation tank or chamber or whatever yourself?
Yeah, I have. Oh, absolutely, totally. But you have to remember, I'm from the generation that grew up with the movie Altered State,
Yeah.
right? So as a so as a child, I was waiting for that experience now. But yeah, absolutely. But I don't really find it for myself particularly helpful because I've practiced meditation for so long that I can kind of get to that place without having to do all that.
Yeah, I figured that would
Yeah,
be the case.
yeah. But it's totally fine. It's not like I didn't have any negative experiences with it. But it didn't push me off into some level that I hadn't already achieved. But that's because I was lucky enough to be introduced to meditation when I was younger, and it was already being taught to me in kung fu and with qigong and all that. So it was just that was already kind of in place, and I was doing that. And so for me, meditating in nature, in a quiet place in nature, is much more powerful than a sensory deprivation tank. But that's
Yeah,
but
that
that's
makes
me.
a lot of sense.
That's just me. Yeah. So everyone's different on that, but it does. I'm sure people can have some extremely interesting experiences with sensory deprivation. That's for sure.
All right. And Lucid Dream just added another question here, still related to the same topic. So I'll go ahead and ask that
Mm-hmm.
one. She says, tangent. Should the outcome of Pratyahara focus on sourcing tabula rasa or epiphanic union with otherworldly energies?
Yeah, that's a good question too, because I think that the best thing to think about is that the the fundamental concept of pratyahara is to calm number one, to calm the exterior influence of the world on your nervous system and therefore your mind. And then once that calmness occurs, then you're able to enter into deeper states, which would be dharana and dhyana proper, concentration into meditative states. Now, if someone was able to sustain the meditative states, then they might enter into what we would call the samadhi state, right?
Mm,
And those are much deeper, mysterious experiences. And so for some people, their samadhi state might be complete utter emptiness. For other people, their samadhi state might be an experience of of Kali, of Shiva, of Christ, of the Holy Sophia. It just depends on what their nervous system is kind of gearing or what kind of practice they have, usually, and then that will just kind of help that happen. So someone could want to go to the tabula rasa, which would be just this ocean of nothingness. Other people might have an experience where there is some kind of communication with other types of we could say intelligence or other types of states of being that could happen. It just depends on what they're trying to do, because in many types of meditation, we could use the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali as an example of this. And so, for example, according to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, in the Pada 3, which would be chapter 3 or book 3, they gave all these things that would probably happen as a result of meditating. They would say things like, you're going to hear sounds, you're going to hear horns, you're going to hear the buzzing of bees, you're going to see lights, you're going to hear voices, you might even have a vision of your Ishta Devata. But and that was fine, but they would say, but that's not the whole point of this. We're trying to, so I think it depends on what someone's intention is, and then sometimes we have a meditative state, something just happened. And that's okay. We should keep in mind these verses. It's the same concept. If something happened, we remain neutral with it. We witness it, we can experience it, and then we don't become overreactive to it. We don't get angry about it. We don't get scared about it. We just kind of let it go by. And then we could, of course, record that, right? That would be the whole point of writing down our experiences, talking to a teacher, a mentor, guru, whatever it is you have, and then to see what happened. And then you can kind of refine your practice from there. So I think it depends on the person's intention. And then it probably just depends on that person's individual karma.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing that you just said there, because when, I think sometimes people will have a vision or an experience that they put more weight on than they may necessarily need or want to put onto that. And then you start to, you basically sort of take a left turn and you're not following the path anymore. Now you've come to your own self-conclusion about something that you had in a vision, and now you're off in left field doing something, and people are like, like your guru, for instance, is like, what are you doing over there? And it's like, oh no, I talked to a deity and they told me to do this. And it's like, okay, you talked to the deity, but keep doing the thing, regardless of whether that was real or not real, keep doing what you're supposed to be doing. And then, I mean, that wasn't what you were saying, but that's the thing that comes to mind for me from a very practical perspective, is like, if you are wrong, you're still going down the path. If you're right, you're still going down the path. Either way, you're not losing track of, you're not missing the forest for the trees, or whatever you want to call it.
That's exactly it. I 100% agree. That's exactly what it is. That's the whole point of these verses. It's saying, like, don't go to the extremes here. Stay focused. And then, record them, make note of them, discuss them with your teacher, your guru, your mentor, whatever it is, and then figure out from there. But don't just let it completely overtake the experience.
Yeah. And also from a practical perspective, I think that's why, you put an importance onto speaking with a guru, having a guru for a different reason than this. But this is another example of why it's so important, because if you're the only person in the world doing your practice, then you might put some amount of weight onto some experience that you had, that if you just had somebody else to say, calm down now, let's think about what happened there, instead of you saying, oh, I figured it all out, now I'm off doing this whole new thing. And it's like, you come along somebody else 15 years later and they're like, what did you do that for?
Yes, exactly. It has very practical implications. It just helps you not think that you're inventing the wheel again. That's the big. So that's very good. I'm glad you're sharing those ideas.
So let's see here. Another question. Your Flame says, there are so many online resources these days to learn meditation. Do you think these are enough, or does one still need a teacher?
That's a great question too. No, I think that's the irony, right? We live in an age where we have unlimited and unprecedented access to teachings on meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Yet I don't think the majority of people are doing it or taking it for that. So I think you could probably find some amazing resources for learning to meditate, learning how to breathe correctly. And there's nothing wrong with any of those. I think the point would come is if someone just felt like they had stalled or they had reached a plateau. And then that point, it can be very helpful to have a teacher or a guide or guru of whatever the person felt comfortable with to help you, just give you some advice for that. And then also too, sometimes people, um, that's a good question, because sometimes people will start a meditation technique which will be completely, um, we could say, philosophically neutral, in the sense that it's not coming from any, quote, religious perspective, yet they have an experience they don't understand as a result of that. And
Yeah.
sometimes that experience might be linked to a particular religious belief. And in those cases, that's very unique. Sometimes that reveals very unique karmic implications. Other times it doesn't. But it's great if that person can, at that point, go to someone and say, "Hey, I had this experience. What do I make of that?" And that's when I think it can be really important to have someone to talk to.
Yeah.
Because if something does happen, they have that experience. At least they can have someone to dialogue with.
Yeah, and
There's amazing resources out there for sure. Absolutely.
I think it could be useful if you wouldn't mind telling us what your definition of karma is. Some people here are going to know what you mean when you say karma, and other people
Mm-hmm.
are going to have a very potentially wrong interpretation of that word.
Yeah, well, that's like a 6-hour lecture in itself.
Yeah.
But it's an important question. I think what that means is oftentimes, we have an experience that is being reflected into our mind space due to past experiences we had, and it could be potentially other lifetimes, or it could just be from, if people are more comfortable with thinking in a Jungian framework, where they would say, no, they're having an experience of a true living archetype, or they're tapping into the collective unconscious. Whatever someone feels comfortable with, how they want to phrase it, that's what I'm talking about. Is that something shows up, it means that person has some unique connection to something, or unique proclivity to be communicate with something. And why that is, we don't always know. But different schools of thought have always tried to see why that is, but usually they can be very interesting. And it's very interesting when something happens to someone or experience that they didn't expect. And sometimes it's like, I think the easiest way for people to wrap their minds around this is everyone, I think, would feel comfortable with the concept that if they said, I started to practice meditation, I started to do system A meditation. And then after a month of doing that, I consistently dreamed of this following vision. They would think, oh, that's kind of unique, right? Because
Hmm.
the European mind is really obsessed with dreams, right? They really have put dreams up on this like kind of magical level. The Eastern perspective is like, it's a dream. It doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean anything. But I think they would feel comfortable with that, and they say, "Oh, this must mean something. It keeps showing up in my dreams, or I had this experience in my dream that was very powerful." Well, that's the same thing. It's like if someone has an experience or meditation that happened to them, it's like, "Oh, that probably means something in some way, it might mean something." So at that point, you nailed it previously when you said that's when you need someone to talk to about that. That's when it can be helpful to dialogue with someone, because they might say, well, that could be reflective of the way you were raised and your experiences that you hated in Catholic school. And you're like, oh, right, that makes sense. Okay, that's just, or they might say, that's pretty unique because it could mean something else. And so it's good just to have that check and balance system,
Yeah.
just to, tell what something is like. So I think at that point, that's when it's nice to have the teacher or guide or mentor or guru, whatever they feel comfortable with having.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of different, I think there's all sorts of different points where one person might not necessarily need a guru or a teacher or mentor or whatever you want to call it for this thing, but for the next thing, then they do. Like for me, I
100%.
was reading the Ramayana a month ago, and then I had a
Mhm.
dream about Rama. Now, Under certain
Uh,
circumstances, I could have woke up the next morning and been like, my God, I made contact with Rama, and like go around and
yeah,
tell
yeah,
everybody I just had a connection to God. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And
yeah,
but to
yeah.
me, I was like,
So,
I was reading the book, it was in my mind, I had the dream, it was a dream, you know, and I woke up the
yeah,
next morning and basically felt the same as I felt when I went to sleep. But a different person might have woke up and been like, you guys won't believe what just happened, you know?
yeah, yeah, totally.
So, but then I'm sure there's somewhere else that I'm missing the mark. And if only I had somebody else sitting there beside me to be like, hey, Michael, you're all wrong on that. But I don't know where that point is. You know what I mean?
Right,
So
right. Yeah, no,
that's
that,
why you have to have the person there to tell you, hey, you're missing the mark on that one.
yeah, I think it just as someone gets maybe deeper into their practice, and they wish to go further, or they become, they become particularly interested in, let's say, in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, or they become particularly interested into Buddhist dream yoga techniques based on meditative states, then sure, at that point, they're going to need a guide. They're going to need to talk to people who are familiar with that. If they just want to consistently have a calm, practice where they can go, as my patients would say, decompress from the day, that's totally fine. That's all they really need from it. So I think it just depends on where they are, what experiences they have, what they want from it would probably determine, you know, on that spectrum when they would need a teacher.
Yeah. Um, All right, I'll go ahead and just throw out some comments that people have made here real quick.
Okay.
Let's see. Uh, Donbot says we value objects instead of experience. He was talking about that, I think, in the first piece of text that you were discussing.
Right.
Where people just, it's almost like a modernized version of idol worship where it's like you're worshiping your
Right. Right.
iPhone now instead of, sitting down in the forest and enjoying the wind.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Totally.
um, and then they said sound and light are powerful influencers on our nervous system. If you would like to say anything more on that topic, because I think I also was resonating very strongly with that. Like people I left my computer running in my bedroom for years while I was sleeping, and
Mm-hmm.
it didn't occur to me that like all of this my room is like lit up with blue light the whole time I'm asleep. And then I learned more about, the dynamics of sleep and the way that blue light interacts with your eyes while you're trying to sleep. And now I always make sure I turn off my PC before I go to bed, and then don't turn it on until a couple hours after I wake up in the morning, just because of that
Right.
like all of these blue lights on everything have such an impact on you.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. But I mean, I think that's what that question brings up the concept of like mantra, right? Mantra, acknowledges that sound and vibration dramatically affects our consciousness.
Yeah.
And so so we know that, and so it just depends. And then that's the whole system of Indian music, and the ragas are built on, there's morning ragas and evening ragas, daytime ragas, because they would say, oh, certain vibrations were better at certain times a day or for certain moments. So those were always very important concepts in Indian music, and their creation of architecture. Vastu would be how light was entering a building, how light was directed in the building. The Jyotish, the Vedic astrology, is all about light, the science of light, and how light is transmitting information to us. So, without a doubt, light and sound have very, very powerful implications for that. And then, because we also, once we enter deeper states of meditation, we can experience inner sound and inner images and inner lights, on a subtle level, which still affect us on some level as well too. So, absolutely.
Yeah. And let me add a little bit more to what I said about that dream. I don't totally disregard the fact that experienced Rama in my dream. I do think that was I think that was a very nice thing to happen. I mean, I've had a lot of really bad dreams over the last couple of months, and like
Right, right.
if you're going to sleep with a bunch of negativity and fear and anxiety and depression in your head, and then you experience that the whole time you're asleep, how much worse is that than experiencing like you're standing in the Ramayana? You know what I mean?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. No. And it shows you that, what we consume with our senses penetrates deep into our mind.
Yeah.
And so, if someone was always consuming paranoid, fearful news media, then their dreams might be disturbed versus if someone was studying some type of sacred literature and that would penetrate their dreams. It's different. So yeah, absolutely. What we see, what we hear, what we take in through all the windows of our senses, it becomes who we are, for better or for worse. And so we should always remember that.
Yeah. Jaziria, thank you very much for your first time chat, and thank you for following us here on Twitch. I really appreciate that. They left a bunch of comments here. The first one was more people need mentors, then a good teacher is a better student. If you'd like to say anything on that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I've often said that, mentors are the key. That everything I've ever achieved in my life was because I had a mentor, which helped me achieve it.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important.
And then they asked, they said, glad I tuned in. They said, I guess they're driving. Please don't text while you're driving. Be careful. um, they said, glad I tuned in. Are you on Facebook, Craig?
Yes, yeah, they can find me on Facebook, on Instagram. I don't post a whole lot, but I do post on there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. 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 I mean, like if you found the stream through me, I did link Craig in my, at least in my personal post. I can't link him in
Yeah,
my This Is
yeah,
Darkness post, but when I shared it on the Michael Barnett profile, I did link him there. So you can find him through that. I wanted to make sure you were
absolutely.
okay with people, you know.
Yeah, that's totally fine. That's totally. Those are public venues. That's totally fine.
Lucid Dreamed has another question here. Thank you very much, Lucid, for your questions. Yours are always very nice questions. She says, correctly practiced mantra japa. Can this jog past the harmful effects on EMF exposure, or does EMF exposure not have an effect?
No, that's a great question too. What I would say, we're always exposed to this, cacophony of energy in this world today. Probably more so than ever, and some of it we definitely want to get away from because we know it's dangerous. Other ones we don't now seem to have the choice to get away from, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think mantra japa, one of the benefits of mantra japa is it does have so many aspects. Like there is an aspect of it which purifies and cleanses the pranic body, and so it cleanses out the negativity that we're experiencing. And then depending on the mantra practice you have, your dedication to it, the type of mantras you do, we can build up a much stronger pranic vitality, and it does, in that sense, keep things away. And this is reflected even in teachers like Nisargadatta Maharaj or Ramana Maharshi, who they had reached a state, or they would talk about reaching a state where you were beyond being affected by the everyday world. And so that what that means is it didn't mean you were ignoring these things, but it meant that you were just less affected by them. And that was probably because the person had cultivated enough prana where they just weren't being affected by it as much. But we have to be smart. We have to know that just because you aren't feeling that you're affected by something, sometimes you still are being affected by it, right? And so
Yeah.
that's very common. We can't fool ourselves in saying like, oh, I have reached a higher state of consciousness. Nothing is going to affect me. We don't want to reach that level of this kind of solipsistic mirage. But I do think that mantra japa, properly practiced and dedicated practice, does have the potential 100% to clear out, to cleanse the pranic body, and to build up a type of pranic insulation where the exterior world is absolutely has less of the ability to affect it, for sure. It just takes a dedicated mantra practice, like someone who is doing that for hours a day. At that point, could potentially reach that level for sure.
Okay, and then just real quick for people again that may be less less involved in these sort of topics on a daily basis, what does mantra japa mean for people that might not know?
Mantra japa would be the repetition of a certain, the mantra would be a certain sound or a certain type of phrase in Sanskrit from these traditions, which has a certain sound vibration which affects your consciousness.
Yep, perfect.
And then that's typically done in a meditative state daily with a mala, focusing on
something. Yeah. So the japa part just basically means a practice of reciting mantras then.
Repeating it. Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I was like 99% sure, and I figured everybody more or less might know, but I just wanted to go ahead and have you say
good.
that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because it's nice, I think, to have, some people asking like more basic questions and then other people that are asking more complex questions. But I just want to keep the complex questions they can go as complex as they need to. I just want to make sure we understand the basic terms here too.
Absolutely.
So your flame asked, Craig, where do you suggest people start? Different forms of breath meditation, meditative concentration, stabilization on particular objects?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, those are good. I think that's it. I mean, I think, first of all, people need to learn how to breathe correctly, and then working on their breathing. So they might need to read a little bit or learn a little bit about that. Then they need to learn how to concentrate and focus, and that takes a little bit of practice. And then once they feel fairly confident on that, then they could move into experimenting with different techniques of meditation. However, a lot of times they learn that by learning the meditation techniques, right? A lot of systems will give the person basic meditative techniques that help them develop their concentration and help them learn how to breathe. So oftentimes they're intertwined in that. So it doesn't always have to be so disconnected,
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to be like, okay, for 2 weeks, learn how to breathe. Okay, then 2 weeks, focus on concentration. And now you can enter the deeper states of meditation. It's not so much that, although we understand that systematic progression. But what it means is, look, if you're learning a meditation technique, I think it should be connecting you with your breath, and it should be teaching you how to calm the mind and focus the mind fundamentally. And if it's skipping those 2 steps, it might be hard for people who don't have that. So usually I hope that whatever meditation technique they're doing, it's helping them get in touch with your breath, how they breathe. It's helping them start to learn to focus on something, and then they can probably enter meditation. So usually it's all happening at once, but I think there has to be some aspect of each of those.
Yeah. Like from a very practical perspective, I think like I've always, if anybody ever asks me like how do I personally meditate, or how should they meditate, or if I just see somebody just really struggling in their daily life with something that I feel like meditation can help, my go-to has always been mindfulness meditation with a focus on counting your breath as a very, very basic beginning point. Like there's a million ways to meditate, but if you just count to 10 over and over and over again with your breath, you will get somewhere,
Yeah. And most of the systems will start with that.
Yeah.
Because it's so effective.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Just like you nailed it.
Yeah. And so I have a question that I'm really glad this sort of came up in what you were just talking about in one of the previous questions here. When I am reciting the Maha Mantra, I've been conflicted on how I should be breathing. I like if I'm chanting out loud under my breath specifically, if it's all in my head, it's harder to even put this concept together. But my question is, are there right ways to be breathing while you are reciting this? Because I struggle to should I take a small breath in between each word, or should I go through a whole line, take a breath, go through the whole next line, take a breath? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, a traditional answer, particularly with the Maha Mantra, would be that nothing matters. Just say it. Don't even
that's
worry
what
about
I've
that.
kind of thought.
So that's from a traditional viewpoint.
Yeah.
From a certain, they would say that. Now, I believe that, and I do believe that the Maha Mantra has a certain power that is unlimited in its ability to help people in this day and age. But and as a result of that, it's applicable for everyone. So it's very balanced. It's very calming. It's But I think that you bring up a good question. Is that maybe if someone after they had learned a little bit about meditation, they had learned a little bit about breathing, then they're going to have more technical questions like that. So I think with the Maha Mantra, if you're doing it, I would just say as long as you feel calm, as long as your breath, you don't feel like you're out of breath or you're losing your breath, then you're fine. It would be more if you were noticing that you were having to do something differently at that point, then you might have to say, okay, I'm going to take a breath at each line, or I'm going to do this. It's like whatever felt the most calm and peaceful and centered way for you for that would be fine.
Okay, that's cool.
Other
That
mantras have
that was a
particular ways
really
of,
personal and specific question of
yeah,
my own.
yeah, because other mantras have like particular ways of counting on the fingers and breathing and doing kind of marma point. It can get super technical, but with the Maha Mantra, that was the whole point. The Maha Mantra was like, hey, this is all you need. It's You don't have to follow any others injunctions and these complicated rules. Just say this, that. But as long as you're feeling calm and you feel like okay, then you're doing it right.
Okay. Um, Jaziria asked said a couple things here. One thing I'll go ahead and throw in. The Maha Mantra is on the cover of his Tantric Physics book.
Mm-hmm.
But since you don't read Sanskrit, that's probably not going to help you be able to recite it. Their question was, is the mantra in the book? And so there's a lot of different mantras. So if you want to sort of hop in on that, their question was, is the mantra in the book?
Yeah, well, the book has a lot of mantras in there and different ways of talking about mantras. But I didn't really give a particular mantra in that book because mantras are traditionally given from the guru or the teacher to the disciple or to
Yeah.
the student. And that's the traditional way. Although some people might be more attracted to a mantra and they're drawn to it, they can still practice that. And then through dedicated practice, they can cultivate a lot of shakti or a lot of prana with their practice. So that's fine too. So, but in the book, I didn't dole out or prescribe any particular mantras per se. That all depends on what, someone's unique, adhikara, their swadharma, their unique personal dharma, and then what they're feeling a calling to, what they feel called to study or to do.
Yeah. And then I wanted to talk on the point of the ambient music a little bit because I
Yeah,
think from like my perspective is like I feel I'm specialized in that area, so I had a few thoughts on
yeah,
that.
yeah.
There's certain sorts of ambient music that I can put on, and in our last conversation, I asked you about that person reciting a mantra while they were driving, and you were like, you shouldn't do
Right.
that. On that same sort of wavelength, there's certain sorts of ambient music that if you listen to it while you're driving, it's going to make you calmer and it's going to make you have less road rage. And then there's certain ritual ambient that I listen to that I literally, when I'm playing it while I'm in my car, I start to go into a different mind state and I can't even focus on driving anymore. And so I have a whole record label that I say I will never listen to them while I drive again. I love listening to it at home, just sitting in my
Oh, that's
room,
wonderful.
incense burning. But when I'm in my car, that those albums do not get turned on because I'll end up wrecking.
Yeah, that's what a great way to express that. Yeah, that's wonderful.
And it's not
Yeah,
because it's like chaotic or something. It's trance inducing.
yeah, yeah. Totally. Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like I remember one time being on a road trip and a friend of mine, because I have a huge collection of Steve Roach music. And I remember one time they were like, oh, could you put on some of that Steve Roach music that I liked at home? And I was like, well, yeah, sure. Then we put on one and then we were listening to it. And it didn't really bother me because I was kind of used to it. But this person, after a while, was like, oh, this really kind of made me perceive the whole trip differently. I wasn't paying attention to anything we drove by. And I kind of wanted to. That's what, and I was like, oh, yeah. And he said, I'm glad I wasn't driving. I would have missed the exit or I would have missed something else. And that's exactly the case. It's like, certain places, certain times, certain personalities, certain things are going to affect everybody, based on their experience. But I love that example.
Yeah,
It's a
that
great
that just
example.
came to my mind when you were saying, certain people have like one person will listen to an album and it'll put them into a nice place, and another person will listen to it and be like, I can't handle this.
Mhm.
It
Yeah,
it
yep,
might not be all ambient music for that person. It might just be that particular kind or song
yep,
or
totally.
subgenre or whatever,
Yeah,
because a
totally,
lot of
totally.
ritual ambient, I'm fine listening to it while I drive, but others, it's just like, whoa, I can't do this.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
I no, I totally agree. That's
that's
that's why I'm so happy you brought that up.
yeah, and for people that are more in tune with this, I'm talking about the label oral hypnox right now. I cannot listen to oral hypnox while I'm driving, and particularly yeah, Halo Manash and Arctal Eos are just they get into my head. So
Mm,
there's, I said
very
no
cool.
more of that.
That's great.
um Yeah, and another thing I wanted to throw in, you were talking about, how people act in traffic, and I just wanted to throw out this little thing here. I was driving on a really busy road the other day, and somebody like wanted to cut in front of me, and I didn't let them. Like, it wasn't on purpose, but I just didn't let them. And so they like pulled up beside me and they're like yelling and waving their fist at me, and I just gave them a peace sign. I'm like, "Peace, man." And
Yeah,
they
yeah.
literally started laughing and then drove away. Like, it just,
Right,
I
right.
could have been like, I could have thrown up the middle finger and went right back at them, and then we could have got out and had a
Yeah,
fist fight, but I was just like, "Peace,
yeah,
man." And they just laughed and
yeah.
drove away. So, like,
Yeah,
you
that's
could
that's
change the whole world in very simple ways.
yeah. No, it's very true. That's a wonderful story, and that's a very, 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 very important example.
Um, and I wanted you to speak a little bit on Lectio Divina, because people might not
Oh,
know
sure.
what you meant about that, but also I think it would be nice to just go into a little bit more detail about that. I think you were talking about it specifically in relation to Pratyahara, or
Right. Yeah, like Lectio Divina is a type of sacred reading where we read slower with more intention, and we kind of focus our awareness on the words in a contemplative manner, and that we're able to enter a meditative state or a pre-meditative state by doing that. So one could definitely use the Bhagavad Gita as Lectio Divina, to help them kind of slowly read something, slowly sit and contemplate, ponder on that idea, and then enter a breathing technique to, okay, now let me let all these concepts, ideas go, and just enter a state of meditation. So you can definitely do that. It helps calm the mind. It works as a focusing technique. So it builds kind of concentration, focus, and then over time it builds memory of the text so that you can just kind of start to bring these texts up at will from memory, which is called smarana, or a sacred remembrance, the way of doing that. And so it has a lot of applications. I kind of touched on that in Entering the Desert when I was talking about sacred reading, and how it can be used, in a ritualistic manner. And I think a lot of people who maybe grew up in different churches can understand that. At Western Christian churches, Catholic churches, they would always read from the Bible or read from the Vespers or the Common Book of Prayer, and then they would say something and then say, "Let's ponder this," or "Let's meditate, let's contemplate on it." So Buddhists did it, Hindus have done it, Sufis and mystics within the Muslim tradition and Jewish tradition. All these traditions have this type of sacred reading, so you can use that. So hopefully that clears that up a bit.
yeah, absolutely. So he's talking about his book Entering the Desert here, he just mentioned. I highly recommend this book to you guys if you aren't familiar with it. It that like our conversation today is speaking very specifically related to the Bhagavad Gita, and then that draws us more into Hinduism related conversation in general. But Entering the Desert is very non-denominational in its approach to you as a reader, so you can really come at that from any tradition of your own and find just a wealth of knowledge there. It's a really great book.
Oh, thank you so much.
Your flame, it says, Craig, you released some music with Entering the Desert. Will you be doing that again?
Oh, we also did some music for Tantric Physics.
With Mahapralaya.
Yeah, Mahapralaya was just breathtaking.
Yeah, I
That's
really enjoyed
definitely there,
that.
and you can find that on Bandcamp on their website. Like that.
I'm gonna pull it up right now and throw it in the chat here.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you so much.
Yes, the link is on its way, Jaziria.
I
I'm trying
really
to get
love
better
that.
at doing that.
No, that's great. How wonderful! Thank you.
I'll also throw the link to Entering the Desert in there for you guys too.
Thank you so much.
Copy link. And then if anybody else has any more questions, go ahead and throw them in here. I've got a few more myself. So you were talking about let's see here. The section at the end of the text 8 was my translation's a little different than yours, but it was such a person is situated in transcendence and is self-controlled. He sees everything, whether it be pebbles, stones, or gold, as the same. And that reminded me of just sort of a saying of everything is golden. So I was wondering, like, you can this sort of seems like, and a little bit to our last conversation where it was like, gold is gold, shit is gold, everything is the same, everything is good, everything is bad, everything is and so I guess my question is, should you put a positive spin on that, or should you put a neutral spin on that?
That's a good question. I mean, for me, it comes from my perspective as an Agori practitioner, which sees everything as divine. So from my perspective, I see everything as holds the spark of divinity within everything and everyone and everything. And so but then now for a lot of people, that's a radical viewpoint, but from an agoric perspective, it's a radical path. Other people might take the more neutral stance, like we are talking about, where it just means that, okay, everything is what it is. And that's fine too. That wouldn't necessarily be that opposite, though, in many ways, in the sense, even from an agoric perspective, we would say everything has a spark of divinity in it, and that's just what it is. And so you're more compassionate, and you're less hyperreactive and judgmental against everyone and everything. So there is that, but I think the neutral aspect can be a good way to start, because then people are just less overreactive in general. So sometimes there's a little bit of a linguistic riddle in there, whether it's neutral or gold. Other times it's just people can't see, or they're not ready to see based on their own philosophical mindset, their philosophical spectacles. I like to call it their own geography of thought, whatever they bring to it, and that's fine as well. Because an agora path isn't for everyone, just like the Buddhist path isn't for everyone, or um, everyone kind of picks their own life path. But I think that those verses could easily help one, like you said, but have at least a neutral concept where they weren't jumping to a conclusion left or right, and can at least approach it from a more balanced perspective.
Yeah. So another thing, this question I had towards sort of the very beginning of the first text that you were reading there, you were talking about yoga and how in this context that you were talking here today, that isn't the same thing as, doing a pose. Like, and that this was actually, I haven't really dug deeply into Hinduism and all of these branches within it in previous years. I'm really starting to get more of a detailed understanding of these things, but I did have a basic understanding of a lot of these concepts for the last 15 years. And honestly, to me, it never came across my path that yoga was anything other than that, than just doing the poses and, so if you could maybe go into a little bit more detail about what yoga is in this concept that you're speaking about it today, and how that differs from what people would usually consider to be, yoga that somebody goes off to a studio and does with their girlfriends.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of it has to do with historical perspectives. and what historically came to America with yoga, and then how it was introduced in the Western European culture. But when I'm talking about yoga, is from a Vedic sense or an agoric sense, in the sense that it's the science of self-realization. So it would be techniques to help one realize their Atman or their Para Atman, all of that together. A lot of times, some people in the Western concepts, they think of yoga, they think of some type of stretching and physical exercise, which is one of the limbs of yoga called asana. So that's there, but then you could argue about what asana really means. Like, for example, Ramana Maharshi, they ask him, what is the best asana? And he said, Ekagrata, one pointness of mind is the best asana. So
Hmm.
even Ramana Maharshi would play with that idea because he knew people were asking, "Oh, is there a special pose I can get in?" And Ramana would just laugh and say, "Yeah, the pose of keeping your mind on one point only." He was toying with that. So, but I think a lot of people, who are yoga asana teachers, can sometimes hear this and they can get insulted or they get angry, and it's not a jab or an insult against anyone. It's just saying that if someone sees yoga as only asana, then it's an extremely limited and myopic viewpoint of what the Indian systems have to offer. Or I would call it not even a system, but a darshan world view. But I
Hmm.
understand where that comes from. And for many people, asana is good. They get physical exercise, they get physical vitality. They're learning to breathe. They're moving their prana. They're stretching. All that's wonderful and fine, but it's only a certain level of that. So what I typically talk about is when I would say is the inner limbs of yoga that bring us closer to when we start to discussing the concept of self-realization. And of course, within Tantra, that those inner limbs are a bit more practiced. Um, you know,
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad that you broke it down that way. That is very important that you categorize it as asana yoga, not yoga. Like yoga is not one thing, and asana
right,
is the thing that people are. So that puts it into a category for me that I do know what you mean there. And so
right,
yeah, so I guess in the West, yeah, we just think of asana as all yoga, but yoga doesn't
right,
only mean asana. So
right.
that
Yeah,
is a good
yeah.
distinction to make.
I mean,
And
yoga, the yoking, the union of our mind with God, or a higher level of consciousness. That's typically that's what we're shooting for when I say yoga. Um, Not just calming the mind, but that's an aspect of it.
yeah. And I think that's a thing that we are having trouble with here as, you know, as these ideas are slowly moving into the West, people grasp onto little pieces of them. Because when you were
Yeah,
making that distinction, I was thinking the same thing in relation to the word tantra, where,
yeah, yeah,
99% of people, when you say tantric, what is the next word that they're going to say? Sex.
yeah.
And it's like,
They
okay,
always think
but
of it.
no. Like,
Yeah,
I can talk
yeah,
about Tantra for 2 hours and never say the word sex. That doesn't mean it's
yeah.
not part of it, but that is not at all the whole story. So, but I think
That's very
that's,
true.
yeah, I just think that's part of it. It only, people cherry pick what they want to bring to the West, and then that cherry picking gets popularized, and then we've got a whole misunderstanding then.
Yeah, yeah. That's a very good example to bring up because you do see that happen a lot. People's preconceptions of tantra can be equal to their preconceptions of yoga. Um, and I would only ever really criticize someone if they were trying to say that the limited viewpoint was the only viewpoint. That's the only time I could think I would say, okay, that's.
Yeah, I
Yeah, yeah. But other than that, it's like everyone has to enter to their own level. And that's fine. But like for me personally, yeah, you know, and, I've been involved with yoga since I was 12 years old, and I'm 51, and I've done hardly no asana at all.
mm,
It's just not something that I have any interest in doing.
yeah.
So, but that's me, and that's other people have done a lot, and that's what they're focused on, and that's fine. But and nor did any of my teachers from India really do. It wasn't, nor did my. So it's just everybody kind of has their different angle, but When typically when that's just one limb higher up, and as you move to deeper limbs, it kind of falls away.
Yeah. And Jaziria says yoga has a lot of mechanical medical effects.
Mm.
To which I wanted to add, when I took physical therapy, because my back is really messed up. So I
Mm.
went to physical therapy for like 2 years, and I didn't get
Yeah,
much out of it. But I'll say I did physical therapy, and then I later learned a lot of yoga asanas, and
yeah,
it's almost exactly the same. Like everything that I did in physical therapy, I'm like, oh, this asana was that exercise. This asana was that
yeah,
exercise.
yeah. Totally, totally. So it has asanas have a lot of benefits, and that's something that's wonderful for keeping the spine supple and allowing the prana to flow through the different parts of the nervous system and lymphatic movement, stretching, musculoskeletal system. So there's tons of benefits.
So then my question to you would be, would your martial arts be your replace would your you doing martial arts and exercise of the kind that you do, is that why you don't see a need for asanas in your life?
That's a good question. I think that my personal swadharma, my personal karmic path was I found myself much more interested in Tai Chi and Qigong practices than I did what I saw being offered in yoga in America. I was growing up. I found that to be a little bit more. I don't want to use the word authentic, but that was my perception when I was younger. And then, as a sports trainer and as a strength and conditioning coach and running coach, of course, I'm extremely familiar with the benefits of stretching the musculoskeletal system, and I know hundreds of asanas to teach people if they wanted to do that sort of thing. So it has its benefit there. But I think for me personally, once I learned Tai Chi and learned Qigong and then was learning yoga, I just was quickly found much more interested in the deeper limbs of yoga than I did the physical part. And that's kind of what was behind my comment earlier when I said, running calms me down, but I don't call it meditation. You
Mm,
know, so and Tai Chi calms me down and affects my nervous system, but I don't call it meditation. I don't even call it moving meditation. I understand what people are saying when they say that. I get it, but that's not what in my mind, like, no, meditation is seated and a certain technique for stilling the mind,
yeah.
calming the mind. Just like you were saying, yeah, there's certain music I can drive to and not, like I don't think, someone could say it's very meditative for me to drive at night on the highway, or something like that. Yeah, I get that, but that's not meditation
Yeah.
proper.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
if you did go into a proper mindset while you're doing that driving, you're going to be in some serious trouble.
right. That's the thing. So, but sometimes those are just linguistic games
Yeah.
that we play, and that I maybe would talk about in a deeper talk. And people they often get upset about that. No, 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 that is my meditation. No, that's fine. That's that gives them a sense of joy.
Yeah, I find personally, I find Tai Chi and Qigong to be more helpful for my back, for my spinal troubles than yoga asanas.
That's interesting.
Because there's so much it's not about holding a particular position, but it's about just different, it's constant moving and fluid, and it
Yeah,
feels it feels like it's doing more for me personally.
that's interesting. I appreciate that feedback. That's always interesting to hear
And
from
but
that.
but that, see, that gets into a little bit, and probably something that we don't want to go down this rabbit hole today, but those are more of those are more Chinese techniques, right? So that brings in another section of your training. That's
Mhm.
correct, right?
Right, right. Well, yeah, I mean, they're definitely, came from China, but I think that many of the techniques of Qigong are clearly related to practices that were going on in Tantric system.
Okay.
And then I definitely think there was a much deeper uh, cultural communication and cross pollination going on in many of these systems than most contemporary people want to think about.
Okay.
Particularly if we look at the concepts of history and time from the philosophy and mythology of China and India, it's a totally different concept, and totally different concept of the length of time, the history of time.
Yeah.
It's like I remember in academic work in college, they would say things like, the Rig Veda is very old. It's probably the oldest book in the world. It might be at least 1,900 years old. And my Indian friends would just laugh. They'd be like, "Oh," shaking their head, And then, and I remember, at the time, the head of the engineering department was at LSU at Louisiana State University was Subhash Kak, which is a very famous Vedic scholar. He would just laugh. He'd go, "Oh, bless their hearts."
Yeah, that's
Because
just
it's like,
wrong on so many levels because, I mean,
right.
for
So
one, I'd
it's
like to
just,
point out that the Torah is at least 3,000 years old, right?
I
And
know, I know.
so
So it's like,
and things like one of your publishing house mates, not partners, but somebody else that releases books through the same place as you, the Rod and the Ring, like, the Sumerian religion, that goes back like 3,500 years. Egyptian religion, we're
yeah,
talking 3,500, 4,000 years. The Rig Veda, that's, at least 4,000 years, right? From,
yeah. I mean, we're
from
talking,
from more traditional
yeah, we're talking
estimations.
older than would make most people feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Because that's how I always say. I would say you probably don't want to think about what this means because it redefines culture, it redefines concepts of evolution, all these things that a lot of people just don't want to touch.
Yeah, and then I follow archaeology, and they're digging up some cities there in the
Yeah,
Mesopotamian
yeah,
region that it's like that city is 10,000 years old and it has no business being as highly sophisticated as it is.
yep,
What is
yep.
even happening here?
Yeah, oh yeah, it makes people it can throw monkey wrenches on a lot of things that a lot of people don't like to talk about,
Yeah.
for
So
sure.
we got a couple other good questions here. It looks like Born of Fire, thank you very much for your first comment. I appreciate you stopping by and interacting with us today. They asked, could you touch on the subject of Tantra and particularly working with the Dasha Mahavidyas? I remember you wrote some great articles on them titled Merciless Pathways.
Oh, sure, yeah, those are all on my blog, so you can find all those writings of the Dasha Mahavidyas on my blogs, on my blog, and then I do touch upon some of that in Tantric Physics, but that's a vast subject. So I don't know what exactly they would want to talk about that, except the Dasha Mahavidyas are the 10 wisdom goddesses, or a system of Tantric practice that I was initiated in. This my main practice with that, as far as Tantra is concerned. And that's these different emanations of the expressions of the goddess and all her glory, kind of like a quantum view of how she expresses herself. And then within Tantra, different people would be maybe attracted or connected to a single Dasha Mahavidya based on karma, experiences, opportunities. Then they would maybe only focus on one. So many people are just devotees of Tara, just devotees of Bhuvaneshwari, or just devotees of only Kali. And other people might experience all of them or just one of them. So it just kind of depends on the student, on the practitioner, and the sadhaka, who their teachers are, and what they were allowed to study, or what karmically was kind of fell into their lap, all those different things. Because I always say that you don't really choose the goddess; she chooses you.
Yeah.
And so we're all just kind of playthings of the goddess. And so she will reveal what she wants to reveal to you as a person or as a practitioner.
Cool. So I went ahead and threw the link to your Rise Arjuna WordPress page in there for people
Oh,
to go
thank you.
check that out. That link that I just dropped is to his personal blog that he keeps pretty quickly updated. I notice you're always dropping a little something on there every once in a while.
Yeah, yeah. There's a ton of stuff on there, so that even the man get music, so they can find anything. So.
Yeah. And so Born in Fire that just asked that question says, good answer. Sorry, the question was so vague.
Oh,
uh,
no, no, I appreciate them asking. That's just such a vast subject.
yeah. Yeah, it's, that's the thing. It's like, we could, there's like any one of these things that me or somebody else asks you, it could be like, we could just say, all right, we'll just start the next 2 hour conversation
Yeah,
specifically on that topic.
yeah. I mean, you really can go down that, but it's always interesting. So I'm always happy when people ask those questions.
Yeah, great. And so then Attila asks, dark ambient and closing eyes and concentrating on breathing help me through work life and sobriety.
Ah,
But it's difficult to take time for dark ambient and breathing in a busy work life. Any ideas to improve things?
oh, that's tough. Yeah, I I think that I think it there's different ways you could answer that question. I mean, on some very simple practical ways, you can if someone is at a job where they have a certain amount of time for a lunch break. Let's say they're given a 45-minute or an hour lunch break, or let's say they're just given 30-minute lunch break. And if they wanted to have that, then I would say go to your car where you can completely kind of cut off as much as you possibly can exterior influences, and then listen to your music and do your breathing there. Don't do it at the break room at work or something like that. Or even better yet, if you had a place you could walk to and be out in nature away from where you were for even 30 minutes, then that would be helpful. So you could do that. But on a more uh, dramatic level, then it's some things like that you can't really fix because the whole system's broken. So you have to just adapt as best you can. And then, so there's that. So I think you would have to set aside more time off of work to practice this. You'd have to reorganize your schedule to have time in the morning or time in the evening when you got off work to dedicate to a meditation practice. So you'd have to really look at what your priorities were with time. Uh, and then from an Ayurvedic perspective, we always have to remember that what we do consistently, our body to some extent gets used to. And that doesn't always mean that that's a good thing, but what it means is our body's trying to just hold it together. Like
Mm,
your body will kind of get used to some things, and you can tolerate things better by experiencing it a lot. So sometimes in those cases, I tell people don't get so stressed out if they don't have that time at work to do it. Just find your own rhythm at work, and then when you get home, figure out if there's some ways you can organize your time after work or before work or on different things to do that.
yeah.
So it's because I understand that challenge. It's actually a really good question, because that question is kind of reflective of what we were talking about and the reality of the Bhagavad Gita. Say like, no, this is reality. It's just the world we're in. It's not escaping the world. It's not running away from your job. It's not running away from that. But in the same sense, people can know, like, if their job is extremely unhealthy or their schedule is not working out, then they can adjust that. They can do things and line up that. Just like maybe people they can drink to calm themselves down, but other people drink and they abuse that. They have to
Hmm.
figure out what is their relationship to alcohol. What is their relationship to a certain substance? That's a very tantric concept, because each substance has its own personality that we are partaking. And so other people can get along with other personalities, other people can't. So I think sometimes, hopefully, some of that helped him, get that. So there's different ways we have to look at scheduling of time, scheduling of our environment, and then priorities. And then once we think of it that way, sometimes we can kind of start to organize our days in a little bit more efficient manner.
Oh, this comment's funny. So, Jaziria just said capitalist monopoly constructs, all right? And then he says, giving this nice guy his phone back. Peace. So if you just borrowed somebody's phone to check out our Twitch stream, thank you very much for that. That's what I just gathered from that comment. Hey, let me borrow your phone. There's something happening on Twitch I need to watch. Thank you.
That's too funny. Hopefully
Yeah.
you liked it.
Oh man, I had a good question, but that comment just totally made me lose it. Oh no, okay, I remember. So yeah, I was gonna say what helps me and to see what you have to say in response to this. So back
Mhm.
when I was working for the catering company, for instance, which would be the best example for me to throw in here, there would be times during my shift where I would just kind of have to stand there and look pretty. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
you're waiting for something
Yeah.
to happen and there's just nothing going on. You just stand there and smile. So you can stand there and just stare off into space and have 3 million thoughts floating through your head, all attacking each other, or you can
Mhm.
focus on your breathing. And for me, like
Yeah.
I would say, okay, I'm standing here for 5 minutes. I am going to meditate while I stand here for 5 minutes, and I would go into my own head and just
Yeah.
focus on the breathing. And it as you said, it's not as good as sitting down and going into the whole process, but if the choice is to stare off into space and have a million thoughts fly through your head or to focus on breath, you know.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Without a doubt. Because I think every day in our lives we're all given moments like where we're not looking at the world through a neutral way. We're choosing a side or we're judging something. So anything we can look at the world as a constant chance for us to hone our ability to be more balanced in the way we look, to hone our ability. And that's a very tantric viewpoint. Tantric says we don't have to run away from the world, that we can see the world as a place, as an environment where we can experience what it means to be human and what it means to develop spiritually. And so I think I often try to tell people, is there any way they can change their relationship to their own personal world with this concept? Because if that's a smarter way than just saying run away from your world, and like I said, there are certain situations where we should run away with, but other times we need to figure out what it is that's bothering us in these situations. And is it our response or is it the actual stimulus? What's going on? Figure it out from
Yeah. Um Cool. So I think this will be a good place to go ahead and wrap things up for today.
there.
This
Okay.
to me was a really awesome conversation. I hope everybody in chat agreed. Thank you again, Craig, so much for taking your time and your expertise to come on here and enlighten all of us and just further break down these concepts that you've put together in Tantric Physics and to share your understandings of the Bhagavad Gita with us. It's really, really helpful, fun, enlightening, entertaining, whatever you want to say about it. It's a really nice time doing this, so I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I'm grateful to be able to come on and talk as well. So it's an honor. Thank you so much.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, guys. We will see you again here soon. Have a great day, everybody.
Namaskar.